that concerns me is how gullible that the Australian people are, and how easily they are manipulated and run into the crush at the abattoirs. This is something that is so incredibly concerning, and it's interesting at the minute where a lot of us are talking about the federal government. At the minute, you mentioned the government before. We're looking at the federal government with their Misinformation and Disinformation Bill. That would effectively shut anybody up from, as things become more obvious, shut people up from even being able to talk about what we are saying. So there's things afoot at the minute. It's in the lower house of the federal parliament right now, and we're talking about this as much as we can. We're trying to get other people to be active in it. I'm trying to get some of our leading national farmer federation bodies to actually say anything at all about this bill, because this bill is so dangerous that it has the capacity to shut down anybody who might want to talk about, for example, wind turbines on their farm, or transmission lines going across their agricultural land or their farms, or solar panels, or the fact that they're destroying our electricity and energy system and network. Anybody who might want to say that could be shut down. Anybody who's talking about the banning of the live sheep export out of Western Australia there at Bunbury, they could quite easily fall foul of this misinformation and disinformation law if it gets through the upper house. And I understand that I think it could even come into the upper house as soon as the 25th or 27th of November this month, after it's seen some committee. So, just trying to get people to actually understand anything at all is a challenge. And one of the biggest challenges is that we don't seem to be able to get the freedom movement, all the people in the freedom movement even, to get on the same page and really push this stuff. And I'll just hold up something that we put on our page there just a little while ago. Is this, Leon? I don't know if the people at home can see that.
What if you went to jail for having an opinion? Ban the Misinformation, Disinformation Bill. Wade, and then it's got the date there at the bottom. Yep. What I want to do, Wade, is I want to very quickly play a clip from our esteemed leader, dear leader, Comrade Anthony Albanese. Just 2 very short clips, and then I want to get your reaction to it. His justification for passing this Disinformation, Misinformation Bill. Let's hear him out.
Harm to our kids, and I'm calling time on it. I've spoken to thousands of parents, grandparents, aunties and uncles. They, like me, are worried sick about the safety of our kids online. And I want Australian parents and families to know that the government has your back. Now, government's proposed age is 16. That decision was made in Cabinet on Monday. And that proposal will go to the National Cabinet meeting that I'm convening online, a virtual meeting tomorrow morning. The E-Safety Commissioner will provide oversight and enforcement. The legislation will come into force 12 months after passage. There will be a review of the legislation following its commencement to make sure this is world-leading legislation. We want to make sure that it is got right. The E-Safety Commissioner will issue regulatory guidance setting out what reasonable steps can be taken by platforms, and that will be informed by the age assurance trial.
Young people being able to access alcohol, under the age of 18, but shops verify those ages using a government-issued ID, for instance? I mean, should Australians be prepared for having their faces scanned to use social media? Should they be prepared to upload their documents to some sort of government database that social media companies can then tap into for age verification? I mean, what are the options here? As you say, the age assurance trial hasn't been finalised yet.
Well, this is exactly what the age assurance trial is informing. But let's be clear too, these platforms know their users better than anyone. These platforms understand their habits, their capabilities, what sort of content should be driven to them and what their behaviours are. So in this year that we will take in terms of implementation, that will be the key focus. And as the Prime Minister mentioned, it's very important to have privacy protections in place here. This is a complex area, but it is one that we are determined to get right. It's one that we are determined to implement because we know what's at stake here.
They know what's at stake here and he's calling time on it. Your reaction, Wade?
Well, where do we start? First of all, when we talk about somewhere like Gitmo, well, I would suggest to you the two faces we just saw would be prime candidates. If they're so concerned about the safety of kids, and the so-called e-safety commissioner, who's another, should be a very short-term inmate at Gitmo, if they're supposedly, what dumb people would believe one word of the lies they're saying, for the simple reason that there was a number of people who were involved in the same sentence as pedophilia. There was a number of them, and it's been suppressed. And I just wonder why they're not saying, well, let's have a look at that. Let's have a look at those numbers. You know what I mean? If they're so concerned about kids' safety, which, in my opinion, and everything I'm saying on your show tonight, as well as I presume you, Leon, these are my opinions, and people are free to make their own decisions about what they say. I'm not saying I'm the be-all and end-all of everything, and I can only make my opinions based on what I know or think. These people are not the slightest bit concerned in the safety of anyone's kids. Make no mistake in the world. They were quite happy to see people's kids be injected with a lethal injection, and now many of them are dead. Secondly, I do remember that after the that disgusting, fraudulent hoax of a voice referendum, there was a couple of politicians who put up some kind of a resolution that they wanted to have an inquiry into the amount of Aboriginal kids who were victims of pedophiles. And that's a fairly broad sort of a description. I'm not sure of the wording of the bill or whatever that they put up for discussion. But if I remember correctly, the Labor Party and the Greens voted against it. So therefore, you've had somebody who said, right, there's a lot of danger for young kids in the Aboriginal communities. And that's not only Aboriginal, but this was their classification, where they were trying to advocate the safety of kids. And the Labor Party and the Greens voted against having kids made safe. They voted exactly right. So the people need to look at sleazebag Albanese and that other thing next to him and understand these people are barefaced liars. They are looking straight down the camera, and you talked about professional career politicians, I talked about polished politicians, and we're talking about lying scumbags that, in my opinion, are just like the two you had on. And, so we need to look at, well, what is the purpose of this misinformation and disinformation bill if it's not actually to keep kids safe? And what it is, it's to create legislation and laws where people are going to be too frightened to talk about anything, because they will expand this. You're going to have the social media companies, and let's not make any mistake. When Albanese says, and this e-commissioner horror of a thing says, we're going to force the social media companies to shut down certain discussions. The social media companies are a part of these government people. They are the ones who are a part of this whole attack on us. They're not going to be forced into anything because they're the people who are helping to make this happen. So, the average Aussie needs to get their mind right very fast, and we need to get onto these maggoty politicians. Now, I think there's a list floating around now of many of the politicians who voted in favour of this in the lower house. And this is where we need to take this stuff. We need to start getting stuck into them, the people who vote, the Labor Party or the Greens or the Teals or some of these other parasite independents, because they are where it's at. So, we are at the crossroads right now. This bill that they're putting up, this is absolutely Adolf Hitler and the Nazi stuff. This is North Korea and China stuff. They need to understand that they are painting it as something to keep kids safe, when we just proved that they actually want kids in danger. They want kids to be raped and killed. If they didn't, and once again, these are my opinions, if they didn't, then they would have supported Price's and Mundine's resolution to keep Aboriginal kids safe, but they threw them under the bus. So why are any of our politicians not taking them on and saying what I'm saying? Why are we not seeing the coalition politicians, who I know that they've come out and they've said they won't support this bill, they'll vote against it? Well, they know damn well that it's going to get over the line because they don't have the numbers. That's the only reason they are voting against it, because they know that they are impotent and pathetic and hopeless, and that their vote will not make a rat's of difference to anything. So they want to be seen to be voting against it. But and if I remember correctly, a former Liberal Party Prime Minister very, very recently tried to bring in a very similar bill and legislation. So the Australian people need to work out how very dangerous this is to them personally, and start to mount a response to it yesterday.
And it's interesting, you mentioned they were pushing vaccines. They're also pushing puberty blockers on kids, and someone made an interesting comment where they're encouraging kids without parental consent to get surgery to remove, their privates, etc., without parental consent. And these are the same people. And they're also brainwashing kids in school with LGBTQ propaganda and all kinds of nonsense. And yet and you've also mentioned pedophilia, and yet they profess to care about children. So this is just more gaslighting, more psychological manipulation to get the public on board, essentially. That's what it is. And, it's hit me. Someone made an interesting comment. Let me just scroll up. She said, and I think it was Michelle Morrissey, how are we going to communicate if this bill is passed? I mean, the ramifications for this bill, it's something that they're so huge. We can't even have a conversation like we're having now today. If this bill passes right now, we would be breaking the law if this bill actually comes into force. So these conversations will no longer be possible. So that's an excellent question from Michelle there. How are we supposed to communicate in that type of environment?
So the short answer to Michelle and the long answer to Michelle is you don't. This is how stark and how point blank this is. You're at the crossroads right now. So this is what I say to people all over the place, particularly when I talk to groups and organisations and public gatherings about food and our farmers, and you explain to people what's happening in the agricultural sector, and then they look at you with a half-dazed look on their face and they say, well, if they do all that, what are we supposed to eat? And I always say, nothing. That's the whole purpose of it. So exactly the same as this misinformation and disinformation bill, I want people to understand how serious this is. This is about shutting down your right to speak about anything. That's the extension of it. And I would also go as far as to say I've seen some paperwork with regard to Victoria having I think amendments to the Racial and Religious Vilification Bill, and some of the stuff I've seen is that you're not allowed to talk about this or something else in public, and they are saying that in public also could extend to your own house, your own private conversations where the public are not actually in attendance. So people, get your mind right now and understand what the hell's going on, and get active in getting stuck into these filthy, stinking politicians, because they're setting you up to be no longer here. And these are all the weapons that they use. This is the censorship. This is the making people so terrified to speak. This is the then putting stuff out there to say, well, anybody, if you know anyone that's speaking about this stuff, you dob them in and we'll go after them. And I'm pretty sure that, who was it? Maybe Peter Dutton was talking a while ago about people needed to be dobbed in if they were saying things against the government. So, I mean, what's it going to take? The people who are watching these shows need to understand where this is at. And, you know, they need to be publishing the names of the politicians who voted for this, and as a last resort action, people need to be making a note of these politicians' names and putting them on the fridge, because at some point they will come for you. And when they do, you need to remember who set it up, who has put your family's life in extreme danger. And these are the politicians who are voting for this stuff. And not only that, it's the government lawyers, the government solicitors who are writing the bills and the legislation in the first place. They know exactly what this is about, the government lawyers, and they always get off, no one ever looks at them. Well, they're the ones who write this stuff, and they're the ones who understand what it's supposed to achieve. So therefore, they write the bills and the legislation to make that happen. So people need to understand how serious this is, Leon, and where this ends up.
And as always, they seem to be using Australia and by extension New Zealand as a test